Hunting Orbus, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 22, Perchance to Dream of Cookies. Gah! Ruby moaned and whispered sadly with her face down on the lunch table. She lifted her head up to take another spoonful of Rocky Road ice cream before laying her face back down. Weiss was sitting beside her and just staring at the younger girl's coping mechanism with a glower and her hand supporting her head lazily. She kept watching before asking, "So, is this how you're going to deal with the problem?" And little tears came to Ruby's eyes. "Leave me alone." Weiss rolled her eyes. "Well, we both know that isn't going to happen." Blake looked up from her book and took notice of the fact Ruby seemed to shrink in and whimper even more as she ate her ice cream under Weiss's scrutinizing glare. The black-haired girl lowered her book and looked over at the scar-faced girl. "It was just a test, Weiss. There's no need to be so stern with her." "It was the second test she's flunked in a week," Weiss countered. "She needs to stop playing around and take the time to study the material we've been given." Ruby moaned. "But it's so hard." "Which is all the more reason you should be studying even harder." Weiss crossed her arms and gave her partner a criticizing stare. "You're our leader. You should at least be trying to set an example and strive to do better than us." The ivory-haired girl then realized that she was on the same team. "Well, at least better than some of us." Yang waved off Weiss's concern and tried to reason with her. "Come on, Weiss. It's not that bad. So she screwed up a few tests. It's not the end of the world." "Oh, like you're one to talk." Weiss leveled an accusing glare at the buxom blonde. "Your grades were only a little better than hers. What's your excuse?" "I told you, I didn't wanna." The cold stare she got in return for her honest answer even shattered her playful attitude, and she looked aside. "Okay, I may have dropped the ball on that one, but hey, there's still more tests to come, and we're not the only ones that did bad either." "That's true." Ruby perked up at the silver lining and looked at her icy partner with joy. "Other people found it hard too, Weiss. Naruto and John and Nora didn't do too great on it either." If anything, Weiss seemed even more annoyed by the pathetic comparison Ruby was trying to pass off as an excuse. She groaned and shook her head. "Okay, 1. Naruto is a moron who only got admitted here by Osmond's curiosity, so you shouldn't take pride in getting a grade as good as his. 2. The heartthrob is a buffoon and extremely incompetent, so it's no surprise his grade was bad. And 3. Nora." The silence lasted for a moment before Blake lowered her book enough to reveal her eyes. "Despite the unnecessary harsh shots at the others, Weiss has a point. The test may have been somewhat difficult, but you shouldn't find comfort in the fact other people did just as bad as you. You have a lot of potential to grow and improve, Ruby. You should take the time and nurture it." Blake's words of encouragement sunk in, and the young leader of Team Ruby felt a mix of guilt and determination fill her. Yang roughly patted Blake's back, startling the bow-wearing girl before giving some words of appreciation. "Thanks for the pickup, Blake. I think Ruby really needed that." Blake blankly stared at her partner. "And you need to stop being lazy and just study." Yang hung her head in shame. "That's right." Weiss nodded sternly as she stood out of her seat and looked between the sisters. "You both need to try and get grades as good as Blake and I, or at the very least Blake." The quiet girl actually aimed a small glare at Weiss's backhanded way of proclaiming that she was smarter than her, but knew that if she actually brought it up, it would just result in a pointless argument, so she just sighed and went back to reading. Weiss then looked back at Ruby and saw the girl had resumed munching on her frozen treat. Weiss sighed exhaustively and placed her hands on her hip. "Ruby, you shouldn't be eating something so sugary and loaded like that before eating." "Aw, please," Ruby begged desperately. "I'm sad enough that I failed the test, and you're upset with me." "I'm not." Weiss grumbled and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "First of all, it still amazes me that your teeth haven't rotten down to the enamel for the amount of sugar you devour every day." "You ain't seen nothing yet," Yang bragged. "When we grew up, she didn't even bother putting syrup on her pancakes. She poured the syrup directly into her mouth and then ate the pancakes. It was awesome." Oh God, it was taking all of Blake and Weiss's integrity not to gag at the mental image. Ruby blushed with flattery and waved her hand. "Oh, stop." Blake turned a little more pale. "Please stop." "Anyway," Weiss got back to her observation, "eating that much sugar before going to bed is unhealthy. There's barely any healthy ingredients or nutrition in it. It won't properly digest when you're asleep. Plus, it will probably give you bad dreams." Pfft. Yang just scoffed at the suggestion. "It's just a myth. It's what our parents told us so that we don't hassle them for treats and snacks before we go to bed. Dad used to use that line all the time so we didn't sneak out and take the cookie jar into our room." Weiss shrugged. Well, even if that part is just a myth, the rest of it is true. It's not good for the body to eat like that before going to bed. You need to have a healthy and balanced diet to keep your body strong. She smiled proudly and placed a hand on her chest. That's how I keep my body in such good condition, avoiding fatty foods like that. Healthy skin, slim but strong body, perfect for fighting and just about anything else if necessary. Yang giggled under her breath. Yeah, I bet it was skipping out on a bunch of those fatty foods that kept you so slim, even now. Weiss's eyebrow twitched infuriatedly as she glared down at Yang. And what might you be insinuating exactly? She held her hand up defensively. I'm not insinuating anything. I just agree with what you said. Weiss placed her hands on the table and leaned in to glare at the blonde. Yang Xiaolong, I've learned enough about you these last few weeks where I can notice the infliction you add. What do you mean by slim? Well, you know, you're a stick. How dare you? Weiss started yelling indignantly as Yang tried to protect herself from the barrage of light slaps aimed her way. Blake leaned away from them in her seat and tried to focus on her book to no avail, while Ruby just drowned them out and focused on eating her comfort food. Hunting. Weiss walked out of the bathroom while making sure her hair wasn't wet after coming out of the shower. After refreshing herself, she walked over to her bed and slipped under the covers to get comfortable. Yang peeked down at her partner's bed and saw Blake finishing up on the big book she started reading yesterday. The blonde asked, Hey Blake, do you remember how much work we've got this week? A lot, Blake said while she turned the page. I tell you how much, but you'd probably get depressed hearing it, so I'll let it come slowly over the next few days. Yang seemed disheartened by that news and sighed. Thanks. I know bikini is a big deal and everything, but this workload is just inhuman. She waited for the reply from her partner and looked down to see she was totally engrossed by her book. She looked aside awkwardly before asking, Want to play a game until we get sleepy? Not really, Blake responded. Yang's eyes rolled. God, you need to expand your horizon, girl. You need a hobby. I have a hobby, one I enjoy very much. She turned the page again. I'm doing it right now. It'd be much easier if I could do it quietly. Blake, reading is not a hobby. It is self-inflicted torture over a long, slow period of time. Well, I'm tough, so I can take it, and consider the books I'll read tomorrow as more conditioning. You're not fun. It only took you 2 months to figure that out. The partner's banter was interrupted when Ruby bashfully peeked her head down towards Weiss's bed. Weiss? What is it? Ruby didn't answer as her eyes darted around nervously. Weiss looked up at her. Come on, speak up. I can't. I'm not sleepy. Weiss gave her a flat, accusing look that immediately made Ruby close her eyes. I'm sorry. The hare shook her head. I told you this was going to happen. I know, and I'm sorry. Weiss rubbed her eyes tiredly. It's fine. I can't exactly say I didn't expect this. She pulled the comforter off of her and sat on the edge of her bed. So what can we do to fix this? How about a story? Yang suggested as she relaxed into her bed with her head rested on her arms. She smiled fondly at her little sister. Those always worked to knock you out when we were brats. Ruby pouted at her older sister, having to bring up that simplistic method from when they were younger. But before she could argue against it, Weiss agreed. That seems like it might work. What? Ruby cried out and looked down at her partner. I'm not going to go to sleep with just a story. Weiss crossed her arms and thought, now we just need to figure out which story is best. Weiss, are you listening to me? Weiss looked up at her innocently. Oh, I'm sorry. Is the girl who ignored what I said before and now asking us for help complaining? Do you have something to add? Ruby shrunk back into her bed. Sorry, go ahead. Good. Weiss rested her head in her hand. Now what would work best? A lullaby? Or maybe an old fairy tale? The Princess and the Moon? The Majesties of Menagerie? Oh, how about the scary story? Yang eagerly suggested while wiggling her fingers and making a creepy sneering towards her baby sister. Huh, how about that, Ruby? You want to hear about the School of the Undead again? You were always scared of that story growing up. Yeah, growing up, but I'm done being scared of baby stories like that, Yang. Ruby sat up in her bed and proudly smacked her chest. I'm a huntress now. I can handle any scary story. Yang cheekily grinned. I can see your legs shaking. No, you can't. We're trying to make a peaceful, serene situation at the moment. A scary story would only cause more anxiety, they cautioned as she looked up from her book. We're not telling horror stories. Ruby seemed to calm down a bit and relax peacefully into her bed. Calm, serene, and a way to make sure she goes to sleep. Yang snapped her fingers when a brilliant idea popped into her head. She peeked down at her partner again. Blake, read a part of your book. I bet that'll work. Blake glared at her accusingly at the way she suggested that her book was boring enough to put someone to sleep. She decided that reading an excerpt from her story may actually work to their benefit and turned to the prologue of the book. She started reading. Prologue. The Gathering. A man sat in the cathedral in wait as he stared up at the smoke rising from his cigarette, the guilty pleasure generating some sense of warmth inside his body, while the cold room grew even more frigid with each passing moment. He knew at that moment any normal man would be in the room with the woman they loved, helping her through one of the toughest ordeals of their lives, but unlike most men, he knew he had no right to be in that room. No right at all. Blake, the ebony-haired beauty looked over at Weiss as the hairs pointed above her head. She followed her direction and looked up to see Ruby was out like a light, snoring and already in a line of drool coming down the bed. Yang peeked down and gave her partner a cheeky smile. Told you. Torture. Blake didn't even acknowledge what she said. She thought it was a great story. Weiss laid back in her bed and let out a small moan, exhausted from trying to keep up with Ruby's needs. Yang relaxed on her pillow and laughed. Well, now you guys have an idea of what it's like dealing with a little sister. Weiss shook her head. No, this is not a little sister. If anything, it's a high-maintenance puppy. Yang nodded. Well, as someone who's dealt with it with both, I can agree with that. Hunting. Ruby blinked slowly when she realized that she found herself in some strange black and white landscape. The hooded wearing girl stood there on the edge of the black and white forest, bewildered about how she ended up here in the first place. The red and black haired girl looked around and scratched her head. Where the heck am I? How did I get here? The last thing she remembered was... she can't remember how she got here. What the heck? The little huntress decided to take a step forward and started moving through the odd forest to explore. There had to be something that explained how she got here, or where she was, or why the color palette of the outside decided to just stick to the two extra achromatic colors. As Ruby wandered through the monochrome foliage, she finally spotted something different from its surroundings, and she knew it was different because it actually had color to it. She noticed a young woman walking through the forest, but not bothered by the fact that nothing had color. In fact, she seemed to traverse the forest like it was a daily routine to walk through here. She wore the Beacon school uniform that had been pretty, long brown hair going down her back. But the thing Ruby recognized immediately were the large brown bunny ears atop her head. Ruby stepped forward. Hey, wait, aren't you from my school? The bunny girl looked back when she heard the voice call out to her before she froze in fear. She shivered like an animal in headlights before dashing further into the monochrome forest. Wait! Ruby didn't actually know the rabbit fauness's name, so she couldn't call out to her, so she ran after her in an attempt to calm her down. Wait, I'm lost. Do you know where we are? Please stop. You are really fast. The rabbit fauness weaved through the black trees with amazing agility, with Ruby struggling to keep her in sight. The red-clad girl decided that she had enough trailing behind and started dashing with her speed. In an instant, she ran forward at blistering speeds and destroyed the gap between her and the fauness. But just before she could reach out to her, the rabbit girl arrived at a white hole in the ground and jumped down it. Wait! Ruby failed to reach her in time and stood over the hole in the ground. It was big, deep enough that she couldn't see the bottom to it. Ruby stood up and braced herself before jumping in after the fauness, and she fell and fell and fell and started falling a little slower before falling twice as fast. Ruby finally made an ungraceful entrance when she landed flat on her stomach. She barely lifted up her head and moaned painfully. Ow, holes shouldn't be that big. She finally lifted herself up to her knees and rubbed her head. Where am I? What am I wearing? Ruby looked down at her new attire with absolute unbridled horror. It was fairly obvious from just a quick glance that this was not an outfit for rapid movement or fighting. She had lost her normal fighting attire and red hood and was now dressed in a red and black frilly dress. The skirt was unnecessarily sturdy and stiff and made it difficult to move. The front and back of her dress were dark red and going up her sides as fabric in a mix of black and white. She had also lost her favorite boots and was now forced to wear black strapped high heels. All of the shoes in the world. Why did it have to be high heels? Ruby struggled to get up to her feet and stay straight with the uneven displacement of her weight on the heels. She slowly started walking forward. Ow, 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 stupid, ow, weird, ow, day. Ruby took a moment to just stop and get a look at her surroundings, which made her jaw nearly drop in surprise. The new forest she found herself located in was by no means a normal forest. The trees and leaves were every shape and color imaginable and seemed to move up and down at a whim. It had multicolored mushrooms and cookies growing out of the tallest trees that stretched up like skyscrapers. At the strange sight, Ruby scattered her head trying to figure out where she was. She closed her eyes. I was with the others, eating some dessert. Then we went to bed. I couldn't sleep, and then I was here. After a moment, a look of clarity and relief covered her face. I'm in a dream. This is a dream. After that epiphany, she looked down at her new attire and found him. Then why the heck do I have to wear this stuff in a dream? An idea came into her head, and she perked up. This was her dream, and she knew it, which meant she could wish for anything to happen. She closed her eyes and hoped eagerly. I want to have a metal suit with dust-firing ability that can fly. With no answer to her wish, Ruby deflated a little. How about I just get my old clothes back? Ruby frowned. Can I at least wear boots? Ruby slipped the heels off manually and tossed them aside into the forest. No way she was going to go through this forest wearing those feet killers. She'd rather be barefoot than wear heels. The young girl walked through the strange forest while various noises emanated from within them. Some normal animal growls and hisses. Others had the same deep guttural churn as the growling of Grim. Beowulfs, possibly Ursai and Borbatusks. And without her weapon, Ruby didn't want to risk confronting them. She braved on into the wild unknown and tried to find anything that could help her and get through this weird world, this weird dream. You look like you're lost, little one. Ruby froze in place when she finally recognized a familiar voice and looked up at the figure over her, sitting on a cookie that was far above the ground. Blake sat on the edge with her legs crossed while looking down at her with her usual quiet expression. However, this Blake was dressed in a black suit that covered her entire body with the tint of purple over it. Her hands clearly looked like paws. She had a long, skinny tail that waved behind her, and where her bow was, there were now a pair of fluffy ears that twisted at random movements. Ruby blinked in shock at the strange attire her friend wore. Blake, what are you doing here? I sensed someone moving around in my forest, and I felt the need to come and see for myself. The black cat answered while her feet swung lightly and her tail danced behind her. Usually the bunny is the only one to make regular trips through here. Ruby shook her head. Oh, why are you here? Because I don't much care for the politics and arguments of the inner kingdoms. They can be so tiresome. Oh, Ruby looked around awkwardly, trying not to draw attention to the big subject before finally folding. Why are you wearing that? Blake seemed to abandon the mysterious atmosphere she was building and looked down at the girl accusingly. I don't know, Ruby. This is your dream. We're just players in it. Okay, sorry. Ruby apologized and shrunk under this Blake's scrutinizing stare. She then gave a small smile and noted, You really look cute in that. Blake just shook her head before standing up and walking behind the tree beside her. In an instant, she appeared from the tree behind Ruby, startling the young traveler as she continued to speak calmly. You should be careful heading forward. The kingdoms can continue to search for intruders across their lands, and it becomes bothersome to always avoid them. If they catch you, you'll probably be captured and taken to face the monarchs. If you have a choice, the Queen of Hearts is a much easier person to face in person. The Ice Queen. Well, good luck if you get caught. Caught? Ruby panicked and started waving her arms around wildly. What are you talking about? But if you want to escape completely, try to find the Doofus duel. They'll keep you safe for some time. Doofus? Rumble. The entire ground seemed to shake violently, and Ruby looked around in fright. What was that? Blake looked around calmly. Don't worry, that happens sometimes. They're restless down below. Blake turned around and started heading back to where she came from. Good luck, young one. I hope you can find your way home. Wait! Ruby called out and stopped the black cat woman from walking away so fast. Ruby shyly looked around and tried to steel herself enough to ask the dream figure for a favor. If I'm not gonna be able to see you again, and this is my only chance, can you do something for me? The black-haired beauty turned back to the shorter girl and plainly stated, I'm only supposed to show you the way forward. I can't accompany you on this trip. No, not that. Ken. Ruby looked up at her eagerly and smiled. Can you just paw the air and start meowing, please? This Blake showed the same bored, accusing small scowl that the real Blake gave when she was telling someone through her eyes that they were stupid. But Ruby persisted, giving the most adorable look she could and begged, Please? And Blake sighed before she turned to the younger girl. She bent her knees a little, held her paw-covered hands up close to her chest, and tilted her head cutely to the side. She pawed the air lightly. Meow. Ruby squealed from the adorable act and seemed seemed compelled for more. Okay, now twirl around a few times and say meow 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 meow. I'm meowsing. Blake stared at her silently. She then stood up and walked behind a tree before disappearing forever. Ruby deflated. Oh, okay, bye. The traveler stood back up and looked down the path leading towards a large gate between two columns. Once the gate was open, it gave way to a brick path that extended through a much more tamed and maintained area of forest. She walked around cautiously, wondering why the background noises of growing animals suddenly stopped before she saw a cloud of smoke just beyond the trees. Was someone smoking? But then why was it black? Boom! Dang it! Oh, that's why. Ruby followed the sound of busting flames and the smell of charred wood further through the foliage. When Ruby finally got through a large section of trees, boom! Ah! Ruby finally emerged into a strange clearing filled with bunk beds as far as the eye could see, and one of the bunk beds had a big cloud of smoke on top of it, with someone coughing in the center of it. The figure inside waved her hands around and coughed violently from the smoke assaulting her systems. When the cloud of smoke and exhaust finally left, it revealed Tenten with a face covered in soot and multiple weapons parts sprawled out over the bed. She coughed a few more times before looking down at the pieces in front of her and sighed grumpily. Another failure. Tenten. Ruby walked up to the bunk bed and peeked over the top to see her friend's project. What are you doing? Eep! The weapon enthusiast yelped in surprise at the sudden new voice directly behind her. When Tenten realized it was just a little girl, she relaxed a little and sighed in relief. She turned in her seat to face the silver-eyed girl that looked at her oddly. Oh, a traveler. That's rare. No one except the kingdom's guards usually come out this far. Who might you be, little girl? Seriously? Ruby screamed indignantly before sobbing lightly into the edge of the bed. We've been friends for weeks, Tenten. We look at the latest pump-action bolts and caliber dust rounds mags together. She whipped softly and looked at the other girl with big, watery doe eyes. Did that mean nothing to you? Did all our time mean nothing? I think you may have gotten me confused with someone else. She waved her arm around to gesture to the field of beds. I'm a hermit that travels the woods and forest. I feed off the land, live wherever the wind may take me, and more often than not. The girl lifted up a piece of spare metal and glared down at it, trying and failing to make a cool weapon. You travel between the kingdoms? Ruby inquired curiously. But that's really dangerous. I hear almost everyone that tries that gets slaughtered by Grimm. Well, most people do, but some people have survived out here, for better or for worse. And Tenten whispered before she glared down at her workshop with contempt, and it seems for the worst, because no matter how much I travel or how much advising I get, I still can't make a weapon that doesn't blow up in my face. I guess that explains the soot. Ruby pointed up at her face. By the way, do you want to wipe that stuff off? Tenten didn't pay it any mind. No point. It always comes back. She grabbed two pieces and stared at them intently before tapping them together. Must make something perfect. Ruby looked at the serious expression on the bun-haired girl's face and could sympathize with her desire to create an awesome weapon. Crescent Rose wasn't built in a day. The silver-eyed girl seemed to ignore the strange dreamland she found herself in as she finally found something to keep her grounded. She leaped up on the other side of the bed, startling the young hermit as she grabbed some pieces of spare weapons on her bed. So, we just gotta use these pieces to build something cool, right? Then we're totally set. Flint looked down at the pieces between them and asked uncertainly, We are? Yeah. Ruby clapped a hand on her chest and smiled. We got enough awesome between the two of us that we can make anything cool. You with me? Tenten felt spurred and invigorated by the strange girl's enthusiasm. Without wasting another moment, the brunette smiled and nodded with equal ferocity. Let's do it! Yeah! They made a loud high five before looking down at their tools and getting to work. They connected a suppressor to the end of the barrel. They loaded a mag full of piercing dust rounds into it. They even added high-speed rotating blades that would slice through concrete and metal like paper. They were making the most amazing, most perfect, most powerful creation in all of human. Boom! The smoke cloud faded and the two girls both had soot covering their faces. Their white eyes popped out of the black masks as they looked down at the shattered remains of their masterpiece. Ruby coughed up some ash before shaking her head. I think we need better materials. Tenten finally whipped the soot off her face and sighed. She seemed disheartened by the defective work, but she looked up at the younger girl and gave a small smile. She shrugged. Guess we just have to try again, huh? Ruby cheered. Yeah, that's the spirit. It was over here. I heard explosions and screaming. The two girls sat up in their spots when they heard some familiar yell through the forest, and a pair of loud footsteps were running towards them as fast as possible. The answer finally came when two young men came running into the bunk bed clearing, wearing full suits of armor with halberds in their hands. In the other hand, they held their helmets that would obscure their vision if worn properly. The knights were the dream version of Ren and Kiba, but the thing that really grabbed attention was the fact that there were patterns of flowers and poorly drawn dogs on their respective armors. The version of Kiba seemed annoyed and pointed accusingly at Tintin. "Oh, I should have known it was you, Hermit. Whenever there's screaming and explosions outside the kingdom walls, it's usually you messing crap up." Tintin slumped her shoulders and whined. "Well, hermits travel the world. It's in the job description. If I'm going to be walking around all the time, then I might as well try making something cool while I do it." Ren gave a small nod. "Yes, but the frequent explosions are a bit of a distraction. A lot of people complain about the constant screaming and swearing that follows too." "Yeah, sorry about that," Tintin meekly responded before smiling. "But hey, at least it's me. Imagine if you guys had to deal with one of the other weirdos out here." "Good point." Ruby looked at the other girl with bewilderment. "Weirdos? Speaking of weird," Tintin stippled a laugh and pointed mockingly at their colorful armor. "Did you guys decide to add a little life to the Dree grind? Because as much as the colors bring out your eyes, you guys look like a bunch of kids just grabbed paintbrushes and started going to work." The two boys seemed unamused by her joke, but she did get a giggle and snort from Ruby, so that meant it was worth it. Kiba and Ren looked between each other, and the boy with tattoos on his cheeks rubbed his eyes. "Sadly, you're not wrong." Ren looked down at his armor with a hint of disappointment in his usually stoic mask. "Queen Nora got a painting kit from the villagers as a thank you gift. She found our armors and it's permanent ink." Ruby tilted her head. "Nora's the queen?" "Hey!" Kiba barked and pointed at the young girl. "That's Queen Nora's the queen to you." Ruby flinched. "Sorry." "You should be." Kiba nodded before a moment passed and he stared at the girl curiously. "Wait, you're not from the village? Who are you?" "Oh, hi." She waved shyly to the two young knights. "I'm Ruby. I'm sort of just wandering around at the moment." Ren and Kiba looked at the girl with genuine confusion before sharing a look. Ren offered his piece. We don't hear very much about people wandering outside the kingdom without anyone ever spotting you." Kiba gave a small nod. "I'm sorry, but we gotta ask you to come with us for a bit. We need to ask a few questions." "Whoa!" Tintin jumped off the bed and covered the girl protectively. "You're taking her in for questioning?" No. I watch TV. I know how this stuff goes." Kiba palmed his face. "We aren't going to do what you think we're going to do. And how do you have TV? Aren't you a hermit? And do we even have TVs here?" Ren sighed. "It's all very confusing." Tintin smirked and crossed her arms. "Tell me, boys, are you sure Nora's the queen?" The two males gave her the dirtiest look they could as Ruby looked between them in confusion. Kiba growled, "You can't be serious." Decree 7.25, 7.31, and 10.24 of the Valkyrian Night Code. Tintin smiled coyly and waved her hand. "Go ahead." The two boys looked at each other before sighing in with defeat. They stepped apart from each other and then faced the girls. They immediately started mirroring each other in a goofy dance and sang in deadpan voice. "She's queen of the castle, she's queen of the castle. Who's queen? She is." Ruby stifled a laugh at the funny sight as Tintin leaned down to whisper in her ear. "They'll be at this for at least another 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Yeah, the queen really sort of lost track of the plot when she made these decrees." The two knights continued their humiliating song and dance as Tintin pointed the younger girl towards the forest. "There's another path over there. Take it for a few minutes, and I bet you'll come across a door leading to the duel. They'll help you with whatever you need." Ruby looked towards the forest and started heading down the path before looking back at the hermit. "Wait, what about you?" "Are you kidding?" Tintin sat back up on the top bunk and relaxed back gleefully. "I'm not missing the chance to watch these guys dance like this. Work it, boys." Hate you so much." Ruby was worried about Tintin's safety, but saw that the weapon enthusiast had a confidence while she clapped for the show. With a shrug and a kick in her step, Ruby ran down the path and further into the mysterious woods. Hunting. Ruby had been running for what felt like dozens of hours, or maybe 10 minutes. She wasn't sure. Time was really screwy in Dreamland. Speaking of which, why couldn't she wake up? If you realize you were in a dream, doesn't that dream immediately end? That's what happened before whenever she realized she was in a dream. That's why she could never finish the dreams where she was the best huntress in the world, or when she had a crescent rose that transformed into a mecha, or the one where Swai could speak and they would fly through the sky together talking about the meaning of life. Oh man, Wes was right about the eating junk food gives you a bad dream thing. She really hoped she remembered not to tell her anything when she got out. After aimlessly walking around the forest path with her mind wandering about, Ruby finally spotted something that seemed out of place in the strange and colorful forest. A pair of large, detailed wooden doors that stretched up at least 2 meters high. What made them so out of place was that they weren't connected to anything, but they were still firmly planted in the ground. Ruby stared at the door in silent bewilderment. She looked around the area for for any other indication that people would be around here before nothing seemed as definite as doors in the middle of the wilderness. Hesitantly, she stepped up to the large wooden door and prepared to knock. Just before reaching out to knock, she pulled her fist back and thought about what would. The door suddenly swung open and revealed John in a ragged coat and a very large, dilapidated top hat. He looked around before looking down to notice the startling young girl in front of him. He gave her a small pout. "You took your sweet time getting here." "Huh?" John just grabbed her arms. "Come on, it's lunchtime." "Well, what are you eat?" Ruby was pulled through the door and ended up in a bright dining room with a large table covered with an assortment of food and a tarp. Ruby blinked in shock before looking back as John closed the doors and clapped his hands together. He looked back at his guest and gave her a goofy smile. "Hey, what are you doing lying on the floor? The last guest is coming. You can't eat there." Ruby shook her head. "You threw me down." "Ah ha ha!" John shook his head and worn out that had bounced with him. The irrelevant blonde bounced around the table with like a giddy child as he played with the large white sheet covering something on the center of the table. He smiled at the girl as he picked herself up. "We've been waiting all day to get into this meal, and we're hungry." Ruby looked at the strange version of her goofy friend and felt a little bad that her subconscious thought him up like this. She looked around the room. John. "What are you?" "Ah," he interrupted her and pointed at himself. We don't know this John fellow you speak of. We're the eccentric traveling connoisseur of this land, the crazy keeper at your service, little small person." And Ruby pouted. "I'm not small. I'm compact." "Oh, okay." John took off his hat and bowed at her. "We are the crazy keeper at your service, little compact person." Ruby sighed. She wasn't going to win this fight. Ging, ging. The two occupants of the room looked over as the main door opened again to let in its next arrival. Ruby watched in silence as Naruto came in riding a double-seat bike backwards with extra control. This version of her friend was dressed in messed up clothes too, but this version had fluffy, pointed animal ears and his blonde hair. He rode the bike backwards around the table and sang in a distorted voice. "Dorian and ni yada lufri don now don hurrying ni yada." He finally stopped directly in front of them to jump off the bike and pat its bars effectively. "Okay, bikey, come pick me up later." Ding, ding. The bike then jetted out of the door and at breakneck speed all by itself. The dream just got so much weirder. Naruto greeted John with a big hug. "Crazy Caper, how long has it been since I last saw you?" 2 hours, our friend." "My, how time passes." Naruto then looked over at Ruby and tilted his head in confusion. "Who's this little small person?" "Hey, that is incorrect, animal guy," the crazy keeper offered politely. "She actually goes by little compact person. She made sure we knew that." "Oh, I'm sorry," the whiskered teen apologized. "Hello, little compact person. I'm animal guy. Nice to meet you." Ruby just stared at the two of them flatly and grumbled. "You guys suck at making names." "Blame our parents. They named us." Come, sit down. It's time for lunch." The crazy caper offered them seats at the table that the whiskered boy and tall blonde instantly took. Ruby slowly took a seat across from them, growing more worried and tired of being here with each moment. When she was firmly seated, she looked at the weird guys across from her and asked, "So, are you the doofus duo Blake and Tintin were talking about?" "Oh, you mean a wandering catnip and exploding hermit sent you here?" the crazy caper inquired before a jaunting laugh echoed between him and the whiskered man. "That explains why they aren't here. Dealing with their own stuff, we suppose." Animal guy nodded. "Sounds like them." Ruby seemed to liven up a little in the presence of her weird friends again. These might not actually be Naruto and John, but they definitely made her feel better like the real ones did. She smiled. "I should have known it was you two getting called weird by everyone else." Both blondes looked at the young girl with a mix of hurt and annoyance. They sternly replied, "Hey, don't go saying something like that. That makes it sound like you were expecting us." Ruby seemed startled by their combined reluctance with her phrasing. "Oh, what's wrong with that?" "Well, we're crazy and weird and unpredictable," the crazy caper responded with a grumble and the cross of his arms. Animal guy nodded. "With us, you can only expect the unexpected." Nat reached up and removed his ears, revealing them to just be a decoration on top of his head. John also removed his hat to reveal a pair of droopy dog ears that flapped down on the side of his head. Ruby's eyes widened to the size of plates as she looked between the two boys in surprise. She mumbled, "Okay, I wasn't expecting that." "Ah!"
Crazy Caper raised up his hand triumphantly. But at the same time, it is foolish to expect the unexpected from expectedly happening. This time, John removed the ears as a decoration, and Naruto pulled his wig off to reveal the pointy ears beneath it again. They tossed the decoration aside and cheered. Ta-da! Ruby gave them a small glare and pouting. You guys are mean. Crazy Caper stood up and patted his belly. We believe we've teased little compact person enough and worked up an appetite. He grabbed the sheet over the center of the table and pulled it off. Time to eat! When the sheet was removed, it revealed a large assortment of different foods prepared in extravagant ways. On Ruby's far left were spicy foods with crackers and brown rice molded like sandhills. On her far right was a roast and turkey with candles placed around them like towers. On the far end of the table across from her was ice cream sundaes with more cookies and desserts than she had ever seen before. But the thing that drew her eye was that directly in front of her, at the center of the table, was a frosted cake detailed to look like a miniature version of Beacon. Her eyes became startling stars at the sight of the centerpiece. She tried to contain her drool before failing as she wiped her mouth. You made a cake? And you made it look like Beacon? Sure, why not? We don't know what Beacon is, but this design just sort of came to us. Crazy Caper bowed his head and offered the table to his friends. Enjoy. Yay! Ruby picked up a fork and knife and prepared to dig in. This dream was starting to concern her, but if she could eat a meal this big and appetizing, then it would be worth it. She licked her lips and prepared to dig in. Rumble. Another earthquake passed underneath them and shook the entire room. With the violent tremor, the table shifted on its legs before collapsing down in the middle, destroying the wonderful prepared food and dropping on the ground in front of Ruby. She stared in silent horror at the wasted meal as her fork and knife dropped from her hands. The whiskered man hummed and looked at his friend. That's unfortunate. The scraggly blonde nodded. Yes, but they're recently down below, so it happens. The keeper just clapped his hands joyfully. Oh well, now we can prepare for dinner. Woohoo! The Ruby slipped out of her chair and fell to her hands and knees. The duo looked between each other before asking the disheartened girl, Are you okay, little compact person? She whimpered sadly before looking up at the door. I want the stupid dream to be over. I just want to wake up and go home. The whiskered animal man jumped down to her side and pulled her up to her feet. Well, you can't do that just yet. You gotta finish the rest of the dream if you want to get out of here. Ruby blinked up at him. Oh, what? Yeah. And Dream John agreed as he walked up beside her and wrapped an arm around her other shoulder. You can't just go through half the dream and decide to quit. It's all or nothing, and you're in the long run for all now. I am. Both blondes nodded in agreement as Ruby looked down in deep contemplation. She gave a small nod before looking between the two weirdos hopefully. How do I finish the dream? Well, first, you gotta get it to the right place, Naruto answered as he reached down and picked up a big plate of mashed potatoes off the ground. He started molding them into two large round hills that pressed together closely. This is Siavaji Hills. It lies in the middle of the map, between all the kingdoms and colonies around here. Once you're in the middle of the hills, you'll be safe for a while until it can no longer protect you. Ruby stared at the potato model he had created and pointed out. That looks like a butt. It's not a butt. Oh, okay. Ruby stared at the model again before narrowing her eyes. Wait, are those can't waste any more time. John turned her around and started forcing her towards the door. Good luck on your adventure, little compact person. If you survive, make sure to come visit for dinner. We will have ice cream pizza. Survive? See ya. The door swung open and Ruby was booted out into a pile of snow and dirt. She instantly jumped up to her bare feet and shivered in the cold thunder she found herself in before looking back at her where the door had disappeared. She hugged herself tightly, rubbing her arms for warmth. As she looked around for somewhere to go, she had to find the hills, which meant she had to start moving. Crud, she wished she had something to wear. Walking barefoot through snow sucked, and this dress was useless in the cold. But it was still better than wearing heels. Ruby trekked through the frozen wasteland for a few minutes, feeling her arms go numb while she moved past the trees. Could she get a hypno whatever out here? And could she get it in a dream? If she failed in the dream, would she die for real or wake up in bed? Was this all because of the ice cream? As these important questions ran through her head, the little traveler finally moved past the trees and close to a large ledge that led down the snowy cliff, and at the bottom of the cliff, resting just a bit further in a mix of snow and dirt, were two large round hills.
Yes, Ruby cheered triumphantly when she finally found the spot she needed to find to escape. She was one step closer to getting out of the stupid room, but they still looked like a pair of freeze! Ruby jumped in fright before shivering and looking back to see two knights in white armor holding their swords towards her. One of them was a female that spoke in a demanding voice. "We demand you to tell us who you are and what you are doing here in the property of the Queen's castle." Ruby fell to her knees and hung her head sadly. She whispered out in a defeated tone, "Why?" The two knights looked between each other curiously as the male leaned down to ask, are you okay?" "No." "Hunting?" Ruby let out a content sigh as she was bundled up in a large warm fur coat that helped bring the sensation back into her arms and fingers, and she was especially happy to be wearing boots again. She looked up and around at her new surroundings, admiring the pure white marble that lined the floor and walls of the castle hall. She looked between the knights, Pira and Sasuke, and nodded to them gratefully. "Thanks for giving me some warm clothes. Any longer and I was going to turn into a ruby sickle." The red-haired knight gave a polite nod. "It's no trouble, but what were you doing out here wearing such light clothes like that? And how could you even get all the way out here without dying from hypothermia?" The black-haired knight on her other side looked down at her questionably. "I'd like to know why you weren't wearing any shoes." Ruby gave a nervous laugh. I was wearing heels, but I threw them away." Ruby didn't get a response from the two older teens and looked up to see the strange and skeptical expression on their faces. She shook her head. "I wasn't planning to come up to the mountains like this. I really don't like wearing heels. I can't balance on them and they feel weird and I trip over them and sorry." "Well, I guess if you have a reason for it, then that makes sense, but you should get something better to wear in general before you come up here to the mountains," Sasuke noted as they turned the corner and approached the very tall door. Our queen advises any and all of her subordinates to make sure to wear warm clothes when traveling through the mountains." "Your queen?" "Yes," Pyrrha answered as they approached the door and the two knights each grabbed the latch to pull it open. "The queen of the snow fields and the frozen lakes." They slowly started to pull the door open and Ruby watched in silence. "Wait." Blig was a guide, Tenten was a hermit, Ren and Kiba were Nora's knights, Naruto and John were very weird guys, and Pyrrha and Sasuke were knights to this queen. Of all the people she met on a usually daily basis, that meant this was either her sister or... The doors finally laid open to reveal the queen's throne room and court, all in the white and glistening like ice. And in the tall throne was a beautiful young woman with long white hair and a crown on her head. She wore an elegant white dress and crossed her long legs over as she narrowed her eyes down at her new guest. So what were you doing trespassing on the royal family's property without shoes in a skirt, you buffoon?" "Yep. It's wise." Sasuke and Pyrrha stepped up to the throne, then lowered their heads respectively to their monarch. The black-haired male spoke first. "My queen, she says that she isn't wearing any shoes because she threw them away, the heels she had before coming here. She threw away her shoes before coming up to the freezing weather and walking through the snow and on a mountain?" The queen inquired before looking at the girl in question and sarcastically noting, "I hope you weren't just trying to show how tough you were on a bet coming all the way up here." Ruby quietly and quickly answered, "I wasn't." "My queen." Pyrrha looked up at the royal hair. "She had nothing on her except the clothes on her back. She said she wasn't planning to come up here to the mountains or the forest in the first place, so we doubt she came here to bring harm of any kind to you or the kingdom." "I'll be the judge of that." The Ice Queen leaned back into her throne and looked down at the red and black-haired girl. "So, why are you here? I want you to look me directly in the eyes and tell me. Don't lie. I can tell if you do." Ruby felt the pressure from Weiss's eyes fall squarely on her and send a cold shiver through her body. It was almost as bad as the real Weiss's, except this one didn't know her as well, so she couldn't break her down piece by piece. "Well, what, Your Majesty?" Ruby called her fault before anyone could correct her. I just sort of came here. Well, actually, I appeared here because my friends, they look like my friends, but they're different people, so..." Ruby thought really hard about the best thing to say. "Okay, one of them was a guy with big fluffy ears, and the other one had a hat on, and they..." "Don't!" Ruby yelped on the queen's booming voice, interrupting her explanation. The queen leaned back in her chair and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She muttered in an exhausted tone, "I should have known it was those two." Ruby tilted her head. "Huh?"
Sasuke leaned down to whisper to her. The queen has a lot of bad experience with those two. The man you were talking about, the one with the fluffy ears, is notorious for pranking and wreaking havoc around the kingdom, putting ancient powder in the throne, sand in the pillows, peeing on the floor in front of the guard station so people slip on it. He's been sentenced to life in the dungeon. And the other one, he's hit on and given many cute little nicknames to the queen in an effort to ask her out on a date. The redhead whispered on the other side. He's been sentenced to 12 life sentences in the dungeon. Oh, John, the queen moaned. Ugh, can this get any worse? Your Highness! Another knight came running into the court and stood near the throne to tell the queen something important. We've just received a message from the Queen of the Hearts. What? Why sat up in her seat. What does that dunderhead want? The message reads, Hey, I see. I'm bored. Me and my guys are coming over, so why don't we have a fight? See you soon. Prepare snacks. Bye. She's approaching from past the horizon, Your Majesty. Ugh! Weiss yelled into her hands with pure annoyance at how she had to deal with all these troublesome occurrences in succession. She stood out of her throne. Get ready for a fight. If that fool wishes to come and play, then we shall show her what she's coming against. Ready to dust. Deploy sentries. Lock down the kingdom. No one gets in or out until we need to. That includes you, intruder. Where did she go? Pyrrha and Sasuke looked down to see the girl had vanished from their sides. They looked over to see the throne room door swing open and faint footsteps running down the halls. She's certainly fast. Indeed. Hunting. Hill. Ruby cheered to herself as she sprinted out the kingdom walls and through the forest. No more weird versions of her friends. No more strange landscapes or teleporting. No more craziness. Rumble. And no more earthquakes. She was waking up. Ruby finally passed the tree line and returned to the edge of a steep cliff that ended with the hill she needed to escape to. Without a second thought, she ran down the steep hill and cliff straight to the twin peaks. She stumbled over some rocks and tripped, and tumbling down the cold mud and snow before catching her feet and gaining some speed again. When she reached the curb of the ground, she slowed down until she came to a halt. She was panting and watched as her breath turned white in the chilly air as she stared up at the two hill formation. With a steel resolve, she jumped up to the hills and started climbing down all the way to the top. And though she continued up and up until she reached the top of the two peaks and looked out at the colorful surroundings around her. She stood there for a full minute and nothing happened. Come on! She jumped on the hill several times and shrieked in a peeved tone. I made it! I want out! Do something! Come on! The hill suddenly shook and Ruby tumbled down to the bottom. She rubbed her head and watched as the surrounding dirt and earth started to crack and rise. The ground started shaking and breaking far more vigorously than anything she had seen before. As something started rising out from below, Ruby stumbled and ran towards the edge of the cracking rock to watch as a titanic figure started to rise from up. Ruby grabbed the figure and watched as it finally stood out from beneath the ground. She climbed up its side before finally finding a stable platform on its shoulder. It stood nearly as high as the mountains the kingdom stood on, and Ruby could see everything in the horizon from there. Ruby gave a small smile before she looked at the Titan's face. Who better to save her from a place like this than her sister? The giant Yang looked at her little sister standing on her shoulder and smiled. The giant blonde started walking along the landscape, and they cleared huge distances in a matter of moments. Ruby looked down from her position on Yang's shoulder and spotted the two hills that had brought her here in the first place sway with every step. Why did it have to be her boobs? Was this a subconscious thing? Did she need therapy? Hey, you made it! Ruby blinked in surprise and looked out to the side to see a bike flying towards them, secured to a parachute. Riding in the seats were the dream versions of John and Naruto, with Tenten sitting on the handlebars and Blake sitting in Naruto's lap. The wind pressure and noise from each of Yang's steps made it hard to communicate with the quartet. What are you guys doing here? We spotted the giant woman walking over the forest and had to come see her for ourselves, the scraggly man said as his hat flew off his head and he yelled. Do you think she would like to join us for dinner? Tenten looked back at the capper and laughed. There's no way the dining room would fit her. It's worth a shot. Ruby had a small scowl as she glared at the guys that dropped her off in the middle of the mountains. Why didn't you say you were throwing me out into the snow? I was freezing. The whiskered man yelled back. We thought you could handle it. You seem strong. The cat girl turned to glare at him accusingly. You just forgot to warn her, didn't you?
But we also had faith. Ruby furrowed her brow in an annoyed scowl at the two blondes. She was about to chew them out before she noticed something appearing over the horizon and approaching their position. She squinted her eyes to try and get a better view of the approaching wave. I think that's Nora Army. Whoa, there. Huh? Ruby went silent when she noticed another army approaching from another side, and then another. More than she thought were going to show up for the fight between Weiss and Nora. She blinked. Oh wait, I thought it was just between them. No, Blake answered with a solemn shook of her head. She looked out at all the gathering armies. They are more than just the kingdoms willing to spill and take blood. Monks in faded white garbs, knights in desecrated and rusted armor, figures that appeared as if they were living shadows, and several people standing on a hill waiting for the carnage to begin. I don't. Rumble. The ground shook once more, and everyone on the ground felt the dirt rip up and turn beneath them. Titan Yang stumbled and struggled to stay on her feet as Ruby hung on for dear life. She looked down and saw the rock and brimstone tear apart beneath them in a panic. Oh, what's going on? Tenten, we told you. John, they're restless down below. Naruto, but it's okay now. Blake, they're awake! The rock and earth exploded, releasing a thick, dark mass straight into the sky that enveloped everything. The sky, the clouds, the sun, all pitch black. Yang! Ruby was suddenly falling through the darkness and looked around desperately for anything. Her sister, her friends, anyone. They weren't there. Ruby turned to the air, falling further and further into the unending darkness, and finally spotted someone close to her. But her eyes widened in horror, glowing red, flames dancing to her fingers. The woman that helped Toshwick escape the night of the robbery. The woman draped in fire. The figure opened her piercing eyes, and Ruby heard a small, cold laughter fill her ears before fire engulfed her and everything turned black. Hunting. Beep, 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 beep. I'm first. Blake groggily yawned out as she forced herself out of bed and rubbed her eyes while making way for the bathroom. In a room with three other girls, if you wanted the bathroom first, you had to move for it, which is why she was going for it immediately after the alarm went off. Early to rise, everything about something about worms, and too early to think coherently. As the black motif girl walked into the bathroom, her partner and teammates slowly started to rise out of their beds to turn off the alarm. Weiss aimed a cold glare at the alarm clock by her bed and firmly slammed the button to turn off the alarm completely. She wished she could go back a few months and slap herself for buying this thing in the first place. Total assurance that she would wake up and not miss classes. It was a good idea, but what was she thinking? The ivory-haired girl sat out of her bed and stretched her arms out with a peaceful yawn. She rubbed her eyes. Is the bathroom taken? Blake first. Yang mumbled into her pillow as she barely lifted her head, letting the massive clumps of unkempt blonde hair wiggle around on top of her head. She yawned again. Too quick. Need coffee. I'll make some. Weiss stood out of her bed and prepared for the hardest job on Team Ruby. Waking Ruby up on time, she looked up to the bed over her head. Ruby, it's time to wake, huh, Ruby? Yang jumped down to the floor and rubbed the sand out of her eyes. What's wrong? What happened to the coffee? Yang, does this happen normally? Yang blinked her eyes a few times before following Weiss's gaze to the upper bed. She looked on with surprise to see her sister not only awake, but sitting straight up in her bed and staring forward silently. She had deep bags under her eyes, so she didn't look like she slept very well. Weiss and Yang looked between each other in worry before Weiss spoke up. Ruby, is something wrong? Is there a reason you're just staring at the wall like a statue? The young leader looked down to her side to see her partner call up to her and jerked back. Ice Queen! Weiss reeled back. Ice Queen! Oof! Ruby dove off of her bed and directly into Yang's chest, knocking them both down into the floor as the little sister buried her face into the blonde's chest. She mumbled into the pair of boobs. Save me, Cleveland. Weiss crossed her arms confidently and looked down at the blonde with a smug smile as she confronted her terrified sister. You know what? I'm so happy I'm not ever going to say I told you so. Yang grumbled. You just did. Weiss playfully shrugged. Oops, old habits. End of chapter 22.